Ever, like, talk yourself into something you bought like it was a total steal when deep down you knew it was kind of a splurge?
Oh, yeah. All the time.
That's cognitive dissonance in action, and today we're doing a deep dive into it.
It's a fascinating one.
It is using two sources about a classic experiment from 1957 by Festinger and Carlsmith at Stanford.
Ah, yes, the Stanford experiment.
Mhm.
I love this one.
Yeah, so
And the thing is, understanding this whole cognitive dissonance thing helps us understand, like, those moments where we do things or other people do things that just don't seem to make sense.
exactly, like it's not always about logic. So let's break it down. What is cognitive dissonance? It's basically that feeling you get when your actions and your beliefs clash.
Yeah, it's like this internal alarm bell going off saying, oh, something's not right here. Something's inconsistent with how you see the world.
Right.
And because that feeling's so uncomfortable, we will often go to, like, great lengths to make it stop, even if it means, like, changing our beliefs to fit what we've already done.
Which brings us to the experiment itself. Imagine you're walking into this lab at Stanford in 1957, probably expecting something exciting, cutting edge.
And instead, you were met with, like, the most boring tasks you could possibly imagine, turning pegs on a board over and over again.
Oh,
I mean, that's terrible.
Seriously, like, they designed it to be as tedious as humanly possible.
like they really wanted to make it
Oh, yeah.
the worst.
As boring as possible.
Yeah, and they had a control group, too, just to establish like a baseline of how awful this task was.
Right, because the real test was what happened to the other participants.
Hmm.
The ones who, after doing this mind-numbing task, were then told to convince the next participant that it was actually fun.
So basically lie to their face.
Yes, tell a big fat lie.
Right.
But here's where it gets juicy. Some were offered $1 to do this, and others were offered $20, which back then was actually a decent amount of money.
It was like a good
Oh, yeah.
chunk of change.
Yeah, for sure.
So you would think that the people who got $20 would be much more enthusiastic liars,
Yeah.
right?
More motivated, but
Here's the aha moment.
yeah.
The people who got only $1 actually ended up rating the task as way more enjoyable than the folks who got 20.
Isn't that interesting?
So the people who got paid less
Less.
actually convinced themselves it was fun.
That it was fun.
Mm.
That's exactly it. And it all comes down to this idea of justification.
Okay.
You see, the $20 group, they had an external justification for lying. They were like, hey, I just did it for the money. I know it wasn't fun. End of story.
Right. They could just be like, whatever.
Exactly.
I got paid.
Yeah.
But the $1 group?
$1. Come on.
Yeah.
That's not enough to justify lying to somebody.
Right. So to make it make sense, they had to find some other way.
You got to convince themselves that it was actually kind of enjoyable, because otherwise they would have to admit that they lied for practically nothing.
Oh, so being a cheap liar,
Yeah.
that creates even more dissonance.
Way more.
So they had to feel good about their decision, even if it meant like twisting reality a little bit.
Exactly. And that right there, that's the power of cognitive dissonance in action. It shows how much our brains crave consistency and how we're willing to, like, manipulate our own perceptions to maintain that sense of inner peace.
Okay, so we've got the basic concept down.
The basics.
But let's get into some of the specifics of this study.
All right, let's do it.
The researchers used a rating scale from -5 to +5 to measure how much they actually enjoyed this task.
-5 being hated it with a passion,
Hated it.
and +5 being like, oh my God, I loved every minute.
So the control group, remember, they didn't have to lie.
Right.
They just did the task.
Right, just the boring task.
Their average rating,
Mm,
-0.45.
makes sense.
Yeah, pretty accurate.
Yeah. But the $1 group, okay, they landed at a +1.35.
Wow.
That's a huge jump, considering this was the most boring task.
So that money was enough justification.
Yeah, basically their brains are like, hey, I got paid enough to make this worthwhile. No need to do any mental gymnastics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I did read that 11 of the responses were actually thrown out of this study.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some people were just suspicious of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And they flat out told the next person,
They're like, it's boring. Don't do it.
don't do it. This is the worst.
Yeah, those rebellious souls who just refuse to play along. I love it.
Yeah.
But it is a good reminder that even in a controlled environment like a lab, human behavior can be pretty unpredictable.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've seen how this plays out in this very controlled setting.
Right.
But what's really cool is that this is not just about turning pegs and telling white lies in a lab.
Oh, no, this is so much bigger than that.
Yeah, this is about...
This gives us a window into a much broader psychological phenomenon that influences, like, our choices, our beliefs, even our sense of self in countless ways.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, so let's bridge the gap here. between the lab and real life.
Okay, let's do it.
Have you ever caught yourself justifying a purchase that, in hindsight, maybe wasn't the wisest financial decision?
All the time. I think
Wow.
we all do.
Like that new gadget you just had to have, even though you knew you shouldn't spend the money?
Oh, yeah. Or that pricey gym membership that you swear you're going to use every day, but
It ends up being a very expensive coat rack.
exactly.
There.
It's not just about spending habits, though, right?
Oh, no.
This plays out in relationships, too. Have you ever stayed in a relationship longer than you should have, even when things clearly weren't working?
Yeah, I mean,
And you start, like, rationalizing your partner's flaws, downplaying the problems, because the thought of ending things and admitting you wasted all this time and energy,
it's just too painful.
it's too much to handle.
So our brains are just trying to, like, protect us from the discomfort
Yeah. From that dissonance
that we messed up.
that we made a mistake.
Exactly. And that's that discomfort. That's the dissonance kicking in.
And to avoid it, we start twisting the narrative, convincing ourselves that things aren't as bad as they seem.
But it's not always about protecting our egos, right? This drive for consistency can have some positive effects, too.
Absolutely. In a lot of ways, this desire for our beliefs and actions to align is actually pretty adaptive. It helps us learn from our experiences, solidify our values, build a coherent sense of self. Imagine if we were constantly flip-flopping between different beliefs and behaviors.
You'd never get anything done.
It would be chaos. We wouldn't be able to function in the world.
Exactly. But then where's the line between healthy self-justification and just like straight up self-deception?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And it's where things can get a little tricky, because cognitive dissonance isn't always just a harmless mental quirk.
Right.
It can also lead to some pretty serious blind spots, especially when we're dealing with deeply held beliefs or emotionally charged topics.
Ooh, okay, give me an example.
Okay, how about politics?
Ooh, good one.
It seems like everyone has such strong opinions these days, and they're not exactly open to changing their minds.
Everyone's very set in their ways.
Yeah. So let's say someone's deeply invested in a particular ideology.
Okay.
They've built their identity around it. They've surrounded themselves with like-minded people, maybe even donated time or money to the cause.
They've got a lot riding on this.
A lot riding on it. Now imagine they come across information that totally contradicts their viewpoint.
Oh, that's got to create some dissonance.
Major dissonance, right? Because now their carefully constructed worldview is being challenged.
Yeah.
And here's where the self-deception can really kick in. Instead of engaging with this new information objectively, they might dismiss it as fake news, attack the source's credibility, or come up with these elaborate justifications for why it doesn't apply to them.
So they're basically doubling down on their existing beliefs to avoid that feeling of dissonance.
Exactly. It's like they're building a wall around their mind to keep out anything that might threaten their sense of certainty.
It's a good analogy. And this is how cognitive dissonance can contribute to, like, polarization in echo chambers.
Right. People become so entrenched in their viewpoints that they're unable or unwilling to even consider alternative perspectives.
Which, of course, makes it impossible to have, like, meaningful conversations or find common ground.
Exactly. It becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. Surround yourself with information that confirms your existing beliefs, which strengthens those beliefs, making you even less receptive to anything that challenges them.
So it's not just about justifying a silly purchase or sticking with a bad relationship. This can actually have a ripple effect on how we interact with the world.
Absolutely. It influences how we form our understanding of reality.
It's like this universal human struggle,
It is.
trying to make sense of the world, even when things don't quite add up.
And it's worth pointing out that the level of dissonance that we experience isn't always the same.
Right.
It can vary depending on a few things, like how important the issue is to us and how strong our existing beliefs are.
So something that challenges, like, a core value or belief,
Yeah.
that's going to create way more dissonance than something that's more, like, on the periphery.
Exactly. Imagine someone who's been a vegetarian their whole life. If they suddenly find themselves craving a burger, that dissonance is probably going to be a lot stronger than if they've always been a meat eater.
Right, because their whole identity is built around not eating meat.
Exactly. So
Okay.
eating meat would feel like a betrayal of who they are.
Oh, yeah.
So the more central a belief is to our sense of self, the more motivated we'll be to reduce any dissonance that threatens it.
So what does all of this mean for us? How can we use this knowledge to make better decisions?
That's the big question, right? How do we actually apply this to our lives?
Yeah, how do we actually live better?
Oh, I think for starters, it's all about awareness. Like just recognizing when this is happening, both in ourselves and in others.
Yeah, because once you understand, like, what's actually going on, you can start to see those moments of justification or denial for what they are.
Totally. It's like shining a light on those blind spots we all have.
Yeah, and sometimes like changing your mind or admitting you're wrong is actually the best way to deal with that dissonance.
Absolutely. Sometimes the best way to resolve the conflict is to just be like, okay, I was wrong.
Yeah, it's not about being stubborn. It's about having the humility to acknowledge that you might need to make some adjustments.
Great, because growth and learning, they often involve letting go of old ideas and embracing new ones.
Exactly. And that can be uncomfortable for sure, but it's definitely more liberating than like clinging to beliefs that just don't serve you anymore.
Way more liberating.
So it's not about avoiding this dissonance altogether. It's about like learning to manage it in a healthy way.
Exactly. Recognize it, understand it, and then make a conscious choice about how you're going to respond.
So this brings us to a pretty interesting idea. Could it be that this need for consistency, this like aversion to dissonance that we all have, is more than just a mental quirk?
Ooh, I like where you're going with this.
Like, what if it's actually tied to our need for a stable sense of self?
Right, because if our beliefs and actions are always clashing,
Yeah.
how do we even know who we are or what we stand for?
It'd be like trying to build a house on like shifting sand.
Exactly, the very shaky foundation.
So maybe cognitive dissonance, for all its like downsides, is actually a crucial part of having a coherent self.
Maybe. Or could it also be that this drive for consistency, when it's taken too far,
Yeah.
becomes like a dangerous form of self-deception,
Ooh.
a way of shielding ourselves from uncomfortable truths?
Right. So you can maintain this comfortable view of reality that's ultimately false.
Exactly. Food for thought, my friend. What do you think?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I think we'd love to hear from you guys. Have you ever like wrestled with cognitive dissonance?
Yeah, tell us your stories.
How did you deal with it? Share your experiences with us on social media using the hashtag Deep Dive Dissonance.
I love it.
Yeah. Until next time, stay curious and keep those mental gears turning.
Well, I think a big part of it is awareness, right? Like being able to spot it when it's happening. Yeah, totally. Recognizing those signs of cognitive dissonance, like in ourselves and in the people around us.
Because I feel like once you understand what's actually going on, it's easier to see those moments where you're justifying something or like denying something for what they really are.
Yeah, it's like you're suddenly able to shine a light on those blind spots that we all have.
Yeah, and sometimes like the best way to deal with it is just to change your mind or to admit you were wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes the simplest solution is just to say, okay, I messed up. I was wrong.
Yeah, it's not about being stubborn or like sticking to your guns no matter what.
It's about having the humility to say, like, okay, maybe my beliefs need a little tweaking here.
Because I feel like growth and learning, they often involve letting go of those old ideas that aren't serving you anymore and like embracing new perspectives.
Yeah, it can be uncomfortable to admit you're wrong, but it's way more liberating than just clinging to beliefs that don't really work for you anymore.
So it's not about avoiding this dissonance altogether. It's more about learning how to like manage it in a healthy way.
Exactly. Recognize it, understand where it's coming from, and then make a conscious decision about how you're going to respond.
So this brings us to like a pretty interesting idea.
Yeah.
Could it be that this like deep-seated need for consistency, this aversion to dissonance that we all have, is actually more than just a mental quirk?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Like what if it's actually tied to our need for a stable sense of self?
That's an interesting thought, because if our beliefs and our actions are constantly clashing,
Yeah.
then how do we even know who we are or what we stand for?
It would be like trying to build a house on like a foundation of shifting sand.
Exactly. Super unstable. So maybe cognitive dissonance, for all its potential downsides, is actually like a crucial ingredient in building a solid sense of self.
Maybe. Or could it also be that this drive for consistency, like when it's taken too far, becomes kind of a dangerous form of self-deception?
Oh, interesting.
A way of like shielding ourselves from uncomfortable truths so we can maintain this like comfortable view of reality that's ultimately false.
That's a really thought-provoking idea. So what do you think? Is it essential for a coherent self, or is it a dangerous form of self-deception?
I don't know. I think it's probably a little bit of both. But that's the beauty of it, right? It's complex.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we all grapple with.
It's part of what makes us human.
Exactly. So we'd love to hear from you guys. Have you ever found yourselves like wrestling with cognitive dissonance? How did you deal with it? What did you learn from it?
Yeah, tell us your stories. Share your insights with us on social media using the hashtag Deep Dive Dissonance.
We always love to hear from you guys. And until next time, stay curious and keep those mental gears turning.